Those of you who've been watching the channel since the beginning may recall that some of my earlier projects took place in the garden, and the main reason for that was because I was using polyester resin, which has a very strong chemical odour to it, and I couldn't really do that in the house because it would have just stunk out the entire house. So a few years ago I moved from a flat to a house, and so an ambition of mine was always to build a workshop in the garden. So I started doing that about 2.5 years ago. Now at the time I did actually intend to do a short video showing the build of the workshop and the workshop itself, but because the workshop pretty quickly descended into a bit of a disaster zone, because I'm not the tidiest of builders as some of you may have noticed, so the workshop was never in a particularly good state for me to actually take a video of the interior. However, I've recently had a tidy up, so I thought, well, now's the time. This is about as clean as it's ever going to get. The workshop itself is built out of wood, and then what I did was to actually follow a method on Colin Furr's channel. He's a well-known YouTuber, does lots of crazy stunts, but one of his videos showed him building his own workshop, so I just followed the same method. So it's a timber frame, and I've clad it in plywood, and then I've also insulated it, and I've put a feather edge on the outside. And this came together over a few weekends, so it was good fun to do actually, although obviously it was a lot of work. So since that video was shot, about 2 years have passed, so let's do a quick tour of the workshop. So here we go. So we have bench tools on the side there, and you've seen me use the lathe a few times. That's the most recent addition. At the back we have a casting area. So casting and mould making is one of the main things I do, so it's very important to have a dedicated area for that. So we've got a vacuum chamber on the side there, so that's for degassing silicon, and there is a separate video on the channel if you're interested in knowing more about that. So some scales, very important for measuring out some appropriate quantities of silicon and resin. I've got various mixing cups and things up here, and I have done a separate video on resin mixing actually recently, so I can talk a bit more detail about that there. Over to the side I've got various chemicals and things, so what we've got down here, we've got glue, and this is welding stuff. Now up here we've got largely resins, I think this is. We've got some epoxy there as well. There's also some silicon too. A few more bits up here, some sundries. We've got some, that's patination fluid. Got some more casting resin there. And this tray here is pigments and additives for silicon. So we've got a bunch of silicon pigments there, and also some thixotropic agents for thickening up silicon mixes. Over here, now, as you probably noticed from a lot of my projects, is I do tend to produce quite a lot of moulds. So these shelves here are dedicated to all the various moulds I've made, and as you can see there's just tons and tons of these, lots of small ones with lots of bits and pieces from various components of projects over the years. Yeah, that's one of my small cast resin pieces, so whenever I have any resin left over from a pour, I'll often put it into a mould like this just so the resin isn't wasted. Down here I've also got loads of tubs containing various types of clay, so WC water-based clay. I've also got some Chivance in there as well, and also some plaster. Down here, these are the larger moulds I've made, so some of these you might remember from my Cthulhu armour piece, and there are various other bits and pieces in there from that project and others as well. And under here we've got a compressor and pressure chamber, so that's for doing any pressure casting I use. I don't tend to wheel this out too much, but it's quite necessary for complicated moulds, so I'm glad I've got it. And if I do ever get around to doing runs of statues and things like that, then that's something I'll definitely be pressure casting. So useful to have that if needed. And finally got the main work area here, so as you can see there's a few projects going on at the minute, and I think the alien egg video is probably up by now. Over here I've got boxes of cast resin pieces, so some valve wheels there and things like that. And I've also just got lots and lots of cast pieces here, so you probably recognise this as being the torso from my robot project. I've also got lots of other bits and pieces, some ball joints, there's some skulls. Basically anything that I cast up that I have spares of I just chuck into this box, because you never know when they're going to come useful for projects. And there's seems to be a pair of pliers got in there as well. So that's it really. I tend to do most of the sculpting in the house because obviously you don't need a dedicated workshop for that, but anything that's messy or noisy I'd obviously do down here because I can't really be sanding things or mixing up chemicals in the house. I went over to the side here. I've got an area for paints, so I've got various spray paints. That box there is full of bits and pieces for the airbrush, and I've got the compressor and airbrush down here. Power is sort of in the ceiling at the minute, or for an extension lead, so I've got my Dremel hanging from the ceiling there, and I've just got the extender arm on it as well, so if I need to do any sanding or anything I can do that there. So I think that's about it really. I mean, I always personally find it really interesting to see other people's work areas, so I hope you do too. It's just interesting to see how people set things up and the sort of things that they find useful as they're working. But I think that's it, so thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.